David had spent months pretending one employee didn't exist. Then one rainy Tuesday, he looked out his office window and saw that same man laughing with a woman he'd never seen before. 5 minutes later, the CEO was running downstairs. Mark Thompson wasn't the kind of person anyone noticed at first. He drove an old pickup truck with peeling paint. His lunch came in the same blue cooler every day. He wore the same 3 dress shirts in rotation, each one carefully ironed, even though the collars had started to fade. If you passed him in the hallway, he'd smile, nod, and keep walking. He worked in the accounting department of a growing tech company in Chicago. Nothing glamorous, just spreadsheets, reports, and deadlines. Most people only knew one thing about Mark. He always left exactly at 5, not 5:05, not 5:10, 5 o'clock sharp. His coworkers joked about it. There goes Cinderella. Guess somebody's got better plans than the rest of us. Even his manager rolled his eyes whenever Mark packed his bag. What nobody knew was that every minute mattered. At exactly 5:35, Mark had to pick up his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, from an after-school program that charged by the minute if parents were late. Every late pickup meant another fee, another dent in an already stretched paycheck. Mark had been raising Lily alone ever since his wife passed away, 3 years earlier after a long battle with cancer. He never talked about it. He didn't want sympathy. He just wanted to keep moving. Every morning started before sunrise. He made breakfast, packed Lily's lunch, helped with homework she'd forgotten the night before, dropped her at school, drove 40 minutes to work, then repeated everything in reverse at the end of the day. Sleep was a luxury. Free time didn't exist. Still, he never missed deadlines, never complained, never asked for favors. But to David Collins, the company's CEO, none of that mattered. David believed one thing above all else. The people, who stayed late were the people who cared. He often walked through the office after 6, remembering names. Promotions, raises, big projects. They usually went to whoever was still sitting at their desk. Mark was never there. In David's mind, that told him everything. One afternoon, the company announced a major leadership opening. It came with a huge salary increase, better benefits, a private office everyone assumed Mark would apply. His numbers were some of the best in the department. Instead, he quietly kept working. His manager finally asked why. Mark smiled. "I don't have time to compete." The manager laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. The promotion required longer hours, weekend meetings, travel, things Mark simply couldn't do, not with Lily depending on him. Weeks passed. Another employee got the job, someone with less experience but plenty of late nights. Mark congratulated him with genuine kindness, then went back to work. At home, life kept getting harder. The washing machine broke. The truck needed repairs. Lily needed braces. Medical bills from years earlier still hadn't disappeared. Some nights Mark sat at the kitchen table after Lily fell asleep, staring at stacks of envelopes. He'd calculate the numbers over and over, hoping they would somehow change. They never did. One Saturday morning, Lily asked a simple question. "Dad, are we poor?" Mark froze. He forced a smile. "We're careful." She thought about that for a second. Is careful forever? That question stayed with him all week. A few days later, while scrolling online after Lily went to bed, Mark found something interesting. A small business owner was looking for freelance bookkeeping help. Just evenings. Remote work. Nothing fancy. Mark applied. He got the job. His new routine became almost impossible. Work all day. Pick up Lily. Cook dinner. Help with homework. Read bedtime stories. Wait until she fell asleep. Then work another 3 or 4 hours on freelance clients. Most nights he didn't finish until after midnight. He survived on coffee and determination. Months passed. His savings slowly started growing, not fast, but enough to breathe a little easier. Meanwhile, David barely noticed Mark existed, until everything changed. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. David was standing in his office, staring out the window before an investor meeting. Down in the parking lot, he spotted Mark. But Mark wasn't alone. Standing beside him was an elegant woman in a tailored business suit. She drove a luxury black SUV. The two of them were laughing. She hugged Mark, then handed him a folder before driving away. David frowned. He had never seen her before. Something about the interaction felt important. His curiosity got the better of him. He called HR. Who was that woman with Mark Thompson? Nobody knew. Then he asked Mark's manager. Same answer. For the first time in years, David realized he knew almost nothing about one of his own employees. The morning, David arrived early. So did Mark. David stopped him. Can we talk? Mark looked surprised. Sure. David invited him upstairs. It was the first conversation they'd ever had. David casually asked about the woman. Mark hesitated, then answered honestly, She's one of my clients. Clients. I do bookkeeping for several small businesses after work. David blinked. You have another job. Mark nodded. Actually, 4. David couldn't hide his surprise. Why? Mark smiled politely. Because one paycheck wasn't enough. Silence filled the room. David asked another question. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Mark shrugged. I wasn't looking for special treatment. David leaned back. For the first time, he really looked at the man sitting across from him. The tired eyes, the worn sleeves, the wedding ring still on his finger. Everything suddenly looked different. What time do you usually sleep? Mark laughed quietly. Depends on the clients. Then he stood up. I should probably get downstairs. As Mark reached the door, David asked one last question. Why do you always leave at 5? Mark answered without turning around. My daughter doesn't get a second parent if I'm late. The door closed. David sat there for several minutes. That sentence wouldn't leave his mind. Later that week, David quietly asked HR to review Mark's performance history. The report shocked him. Perfect attendance, outstanding evaluations. The lowest error rate in the department, consistently helping coworkers without taking credit. Years of excellence, ignored simply because he went home on time. David felt embarrassed. He had spent years rewarding visibility instead of value. The next board meeting changed everything. Executives expected another discussion about overtime policies. Instead, David proposed something completely different: flexible schedules, remote work options, performance measured by results instead of hours, better childcare support. Several executives resisted. David surprised everyone. We've been measuring commitment the wrong way. The policy passed. But David wasn't finished. A week later, he called Mark back into his office. Mark assumed something was wrong. Instead, David handed him a folder. Inside was an offer. Director of Financial Operations. Higher salary, flexible hours, no mandatory travel. Mark looked confused. I thought this job required 60-hour weeks. David smiled. It used to. Mark stared at the papers. I don't understand, David answered honestly. That's because I finally realized leadership isn't about who stays the latest. It's about who delivers when it matters. Mark's hands shook slightly. I can still pick up Lily. You'll never have to choose between your daughter and your career here. For the first time in years, Mark couldn't find words. When he got home that evening, Lily noticed something different. Dad, why are you smiling? He picked her up and hugged her. We're going to be okay. A few months later, life looked different. The old truck was finally replaced, not with anything flashy, just something reliable. The overdue bills disappeared one by one. Lily got her braces. They even took their first real vacation together. Nothing expensive, just a small cabin by a lake where they roasted marshmallows and watched the stars. One evening, Lily looked at him and asked, Does being careful end? Mark smiled. Sometimes, if you keep going long enough. Back at the company, something unexpected happened. Productivity actually improved. People stopped pretending to work late just to be noticed. Parents felt respected. Employees stayed longer with the company. The culture changed. Years later, when David spoke to young business leaders, he never bragged about profits first. He told them about a man carrying a blue lunch cooler, who quietly taught him the most important lesson of his career. You never really know what someone is carrying when they walk into work each morning. Some people leave early because they care less. Others leave early because someone at home is counting on them. And sometimes, the strongest person in the building is the one nobody bothered to see until life forced everyone to finally look.